The concert stopped suddenly. An unknown man in simple clothing with hurried steps stood in the middle of the stage without permission to be there. The audience screamed in shock. Security guards ran forward, and tension spread throughout the entire venue. André Rieu'S stood motionless, staring at the intruder. For a moment it seemed as if everything would end in chaos. But then Rieu'S raised his hand, and what he did next would silence all of America. 3 days before the concert that would have all of America talking, Tariq Nahas walked through the narrow streets of Boston with empty pockets and a heart full of memories he was trying to forget. His shoes had holes. His jacket was too thin for the cold New England autumn, and his English-Arabic dictionary was dog-eared from constant flipping. "Work, looking for work," he asked every passerby, his accent heavy, but his determination unmistakable. Most people walked quickly past, their gazes averted, their heads bowed as if his presence made them uncomfortable. Tariq was 34 years old, a former music teacher from Syria who had fled 3 years ago when his school was bombed. Everything he had left behind, his wife, his 2 children, his piano lessons, his life now existed only in the songs he whispered at night in the overcrowded refugee center on the edge of the city. "Sir, please," he tried again with an elderly man just coming out of the bakery. "I can work, clean, lift, anything." The man looked at him briefly, saw the desperation in his eyes, and slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry, son. Times are tough." Tariq nodded, understanding, accustomed to rejection. He had learned that anger only closed more doors. So he smiled weakly and continued walking through downtown Boston, looking for someone, anyone, who would be willing to give him a chance. It was when he passed by Boston's Symphony Hall that he saw the setup for André Rieu'S concert that weekend. Workers were hauling enormous speakers, electricians were testing lighting, and an orchestra was rehearsing in the distance. The melodies drifted toward him on the wind, and for the first time in months Tariq felt something other than despair. "Sir, may I ask?" he began to one of the technicians, who waved him away irritably. "Get out of here. This is a private zone." "No spectators allowed." Tariq took a step back but kept listening to the music. It was a piece by Mozart that he had taught his students years ago. Unconsciously, he began to hum along softly, his eyes closed, his body swaying to the rhythm as he used to do when teaching enthusiastic children in Damascus. "Excuse me," said a voice behind him in English. Tariq turned around and saw a young woman with curly red hair and a backpack full of music sheets. She looked at him curiously, not with the usual mixture of suspicion and pity he was used to. "Do you speak English?" she asked. "A little," Tariq answered cautiously. "I'm Juniper Vale, music student at the conservatory here." She pointed to the rehearsal. "I heard you humming. That was Mozart, right? Piano sonata." Tariq's eyes lit up. It had been months since anyone had acknowledged his musical knowledge. "Yes, yes, Mozart. Very beautiful piece. I was teacher. Music teacher. Was. And now?" "Now." Tariq gestured to his worn clothing, his empty pockets. "Now looking for work. Any work." Juniper studied his face and saw something others missed. Not just desperation, but also a deep love for music that, despite everything, had not disappeared. "Where are you from?" "Syria, Damascus. Had school there, piano lessons, choir." His voice died away. It was too painful to talk about the past. "And your family?" Tariq's face darkened. Trying to come to America. "But papers?" "Many problems." Juniper nodded, understanding. She had met other refugees, had heard their stories, but there was something in Tariq's eyes that touched her, an artistic soul that knew no homeland. "Listen," she said suddenly. "In 3 days there's a big concert here. André Rieu'S is performing. Maybe you'd like to come listen. I can help you find a spot where you can stand." "André Rieu'S." Tariq's eyes widened. "I know him. His music, his waltzes. In Syria, on internet. I always watched." "Then it's settled. Saturday, 8 p.m. I'll see you here." For the first time in months, Tariq smiled genuinely. Thank you so much." But as Juniper walked away, neither of them knew that this moment would be the beginning of something that would change all of America. That evening, Tariq lay on his narrow bed in the refugee center and dreamed not of home, but of music. He remembered how he used to play for his students, how their faces lit up when they mastered a difficult piece. He remembered the times when music brought people together, despite differences in religion, politics, or background. In his dream, he stood on a stage, not as an intruder but as an artist. And the audience listened not out of pity, but out of appreciation. He didn't yet know that this dream would become reality 3 days later, in a way no one could have foreseen. The next 2 days crawled by. Tariq found work at a cafe, washing dishes for a few dollars an hour, but his thoughts remained with the upcoming concert. He had thought about Juniper's offer of a free spot so often that he wondered if perhaps he had dreamed it. Friday afternoon, he walked past Symphony Hall again and saw how the venue was being transformed. Thousands of chairs were being set up, an enormous stage rose in the center, and everywhere hung banners with André Rieu'S smiling face. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a voice behind him. Tariq turned around and saw Branson Creed, a large man in black clothing with an earpiece. Clearly security. "Yes, very beautiful," Tariq answered cautiously. "You've been here before. I've seen you." Branson's eyes narrowed. "No trouble tomorrow, okay? This is a big event. All of Boston watching." "No trouble," Tariq assured him. "I come only listen. Friend gave ticket." Branson nodded, but remained suspicious. In his work, he had learned to be careful, especially with people who didn't look like they belonged. And this refugee, because that's clearly what he was, looked like someone who could cause problems. But Tariq thought only of the music, of the prospect of finally experiencing something beautiful in his new country. He had no idea that his presence at the concert would lead to a moment that would make all of America think about compassion, about humanity, and about the power of music to build bridges between worlds that seemed light years apart. Saturday evening arrived and thousands of people streamed into Symphony Hall, families, couples, music lovers of all ages, all there to hear André Rieu'S famous waltzes under the Boston night sky. Tariq stood at the edge of the audience in the spot Juniper had reserved for him. He wore his only clean shirt and had washed his face, trying to look as presentable as possible. Around him, people chatted in English about their expectations for the evening. "I hope he plays the Blue Danube," said an elderly woman to her husband. "Of course he will," her husband laughed. "That's his trademark." Tariq understood enough to listen along, and for the first time in months he felt part of something bigger than his own struggle to survive. But he had no idea that in an hour he would be the center of an incident that would divide all of America, and that André Rieu'S reaction would start a new discussion about what it means to be American in the 21st century. The evening air above Boston was clear and full of stars when the first notes of André Rieu'S orchestra floated over Symphony Hall. Thousands of people sat and stood in perfectly organized rows, their faces lighting up in the warm glow of the stage lights. André Rieu appeared on stage in his usual elegant tuxedo, his curly hair gleaming under the spotlights, his violin already in position. The audience burst into applause. This was why they had come, to see the maestro who had transformed classical music into a worldwide celebration of joy. "Good evening, Boston," André called out, his voice carrying across the hall. The audience cheered back. Harlow Finch, a local resident watching from her apartment balcony overlooking the venue, smiled at the familiar ritual. She had seen André Rieu perform dozens of times in her city, and each time he knew how to find the perfect balance between spectacle and intimacy. Tariq stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes wide with wonder. He had seen André Rieu'S concerts online, but this was different. This was alive, breathing, an orchestra of nearly 100 musicians preparing for an evening of musical perfection. "Have you seen this before?" Juniper asked, standing next to him. "No, first time," Tariq whispered back. So beautiful." The orchestra began with the opening of the Radetzky March, and immediately the audience started clapping to the rhythm. It was one of André's favorite ways to start a concert, a piece everyone knew, everyone could sing along to and dance with. Tariq felt his heart beat faster. The music brought back memories of better times, of his classical training in Damascus, of the concerts he had attended before the war destroyed everything. For a moment, he forgot where he was, who he had become, and let himself be swept away by the pure joy of live music. "Everybody clap," André called out, though he knew his audience was already clapping. "Louder! I want to hear all of Boston." The sound of thousands of hands clapping together echoed against the historic buildings around the venue. Tariq clapped along, his own hands moving in perfect synchronization with the rest of the audience. But then the music changed. The orchestra transitioned to a softer melody. Edelweiss played with the tender precision that had made André Rieu famous. It was a song that spoke of homeland, of the places we love and sometimes must leave behind. For Tariq, it was as if he received an electric shock. Edelweiss, Edelweiss, every morning you greet me, the audience sang softly along. But Tariq heard other words. In his head, he heard the Arabic songs of his youth, the folk songs his mother had taught him, the hymns he had sung in his church in Damascus. Tears began to roll down his cheeks. But they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, the realization that music, despite all borders and barriers, spoke a universal language that everyone could understand. "Are you okay?" Juniper whispered, concerned. Tariq nodded, unable to speak. His whole body trembled with emotion. On stage, André continued with his repertoire, moving through waltzes and polkas and romantic ballades. Each piece was greeted with enthusiasm by the audience, who knew exactly when to clap, when to sing, when to stand up and dance. But Tariq was no longer aware of the audience. He had merged with the music, his soul traveling to places and times he thought he had lost forever. Then the orchestra began something that made his whole world tilt. It was the opening notes of a melody he recognized, not because it was a famous classical piece, but because it reminded him of a song from his youth, a song his father had taught him, a song about hope and longing for a better life. The resemblance wasn't exact, but the emotional resonance was overwhelming. In his head, Tariq began to hear the words of his father's song, and before he knew it, he began to sing along softly. Not the English or German words the audience knew, but the Arabic words engraved in his heart. "Habibi, ya Nur el-Ain," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the music. But music has a strange power. Even a whisper can resonate, can spread, can touch others in ways that are unexplainable. Juniper heard him sing and felt goosebumps on her arms. His voice, weak but pure, sad but beautiful, added something to the music she couldn't name but could feel. "Tariq," she whispered, "you have a beautiful voice." But Tariq didn't hear her. He was somewhere else, in a time and place where music was the only thing that mattered, where art was more important than politics, where people came together to sing, regardless of their background or circumstances. And then, in a moment of pure impulsiveness that he later couldn't explain, he began to walk forward. It started innocently. He just wanted to get closer to the music, closer to the source of the beauty that touched him so deeply. But Symphony Hall was full of people, and to get closer to the stage, he had to push through rows of chairs, past people who looked irritated at the stranger disturbing their view. "Hey, where are you going?" someone called out. "Go back to your spot," said another. But Tariq didn't hear them. He heard only the music, and the music called him forward, to the heart of the performance, to the place where artists were born and dreams became reality. Step by step, row by row, he struggled forward. Some people tried to stop him. Others let him through out of curiosity. Security guards began to watch him, but he moved slowly enough that they didn't immediately intervene. On stage, André Rieu'S continued playing, unaware of the disturbance in his audience. His eyes were closed, his violin singing with the passion that had made him famous worldwide. But Tariq kept getting closer. And then, in a moment that would later be captured on video and viewed millions of times, he reached the edge of the stage. Branson Creed saw him first. "Hey, you there, stop!" But it was too late. With a movement that expressed more desperation than courage, Tariq climbed onto the stage. The concert stopped abruptly. The orchestra stopped playing, confused by the sudden interruption. Thousands of heads turned to the stage, where a stranger stood who clearly didn't belong there. André Rieu'S opened his eyes and saw Tariq standing before him, a thin man in worn clothing, tears on his cheeks, his hands trembling with nerves and emotion. "Security!" someone from the audience shouted. "Get him off the stage!" screamed another. Branson Creed and two other security guards ran toward the stage, ready to remove the intruder. But André Rieu'S raised his hand. "Wait," he said into the microphone, his voice calm but authoritative. "Wait a moment." The entire venue held its breath. What would happen now? The silence that fell over Symphony Hall was so complete, you could hear the rustle of thousands of people holding their breath. Tariq stood in the middle of the stage, his eyes wild with fear and realization of what he had just done. His hands trembled, his breathing was irregular, and he looked like a rabbit caught in headlights. André Rieu'S slowly lowered his violin and looked at the man before him. In all his years of performing, he had experienced many unexpected moments. Technical failures, medical emergencies, even the occasional drunk spectator trying to get on stage. But this was different. This man radiated no aggression, no anger, or intentional disruption. He radiated pure desperation. "Sir," André said softly in English, his microphone picking up every nuance of his voice. "What are you looking for here?" Tariq opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. He looked around at the orchestra, at the security guards ready to grab him, at the thousands of faces staring at him. Some expressions showed curiosity, others anger, many more fear. "He doesn't speak English," someone from the audience shouted. "Throw him out." "This is a disgrace," screamed another voice. "We pay for culture, not for circus." Branson Creed took a step forward. "Mr. Rieu'S, I'll handle this." "Come with me," he said to Tariq, reaching out to grab the man's arm. But André raised his hand again. "No, wait. Let me talk to him." He looked Tariq straight in the eyes and saw something others missed. Not insanity or malice, but a deep pain that only another musician could recognize. "Do you speak English?" André asked softly. "Little bit," Tariq whispered, his voice barely audible despite the microphones. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Tariq's eyes filled with tears. How could he explain what had moved him? How could he tell that the music had called him like a mother calls her child? How could he describe the emptiness in his soul that could only be filled by being part of something beautiful? "Music," was all he could get out. "I love music." The audience began to murmur uneasily. Some were angry about the disruption, others were curious about this strange turn of events. Juniper stood in the crowd with her phone, filming what was unfolding, her heart pounding with concern for Tariq. "He's one of those refugees," someone whispered behind her. "Typical, no respect for our culture." "Quiet," hissed another voice. "Let André handle it." On stage, the orchestra members stood awkwardly around their instruments, not knowing whether they should stay or leave the stage. This wasn't in the script, wasn't practiced in rehearsals. André Rieu'S looked at Tariq and made a decision that could make or break his career. "What's your name?" he asked kindly. "Tariq. Tariq Nahas." "Tariq, that's a beautiful name. Where are you from?" "Syria. Damascus." Tariq's voice became slightly stronger when mentioning his homeland. A wave of whispers went through the audience. Syria, war, refugees. The political implications of the moment suddenly became clear to everyone. "Are you a musician, Tariq?" Tariq nodded vigorously. "Yes," was teacher. Music teacher, piano, voice. "Ah," André said, and his face lit up with understanding. "A colleague." He turned to the audience, his microphone carrying his words to every corner of the venue. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tariq. He's a music teacher from Syria, and he loves music just like all of us love music." The murmuring in the audience grew louder. Some were moved by this revelation. Others became even angrier. "That doesn't matter," someone shouted. "He doesn't belong here." "Send him back," screamed another voice. But there were also other voices. "Let him stay. Give him a chance." André felt the tension in the audience growing. This moment could go two ways. It could escalate into an ugly confrontation that would ruin his concert and possibly his reputation. Or it could become something much more beautiful than anything he had planned. "Tariq," he said, his voice now soft enough that only the man before him and the microphones could hear him. "Can you sing?" Tariq's eyes widened. Yes, but not here. Too many people. Too scared." "I understand. But Tariq, sometimes when we're most scared, that's when we need music the most." In the audience, Harlow Finch began to shout from her balcony, "Let him sing. If he's a musician, let him sing." Other voices joined in, but there was also resistance. "No, this is André's concert. We don't want politics." Branson Creed came closer. "Mr. Rieu'S, this is getting out of hand. We need to get him off." But André shook his head. He looked at Tariq, who stood there trembling with fear and hope, and saw himself from many years ago. A young musician nervous before his first performance, afraid of failing, but filled with love for his art. "Tariq," he said, "I'm going to give you a choice. You can leave now with dignity, and no one will think less of you. Or," he paused, making a decision he didn't fully understand but felt, "or you can stay and show us why music brought you here." Symphony Hall became so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Thousands of people waited for Tariq's answer. their own prejudices and expectations determining how they looked at this moment. Tariq looked out over the audience, all those faces, some friendly, others hostile, most just curious. He thought of his wife and children still sitting in a refugee camp, waiting for papers to come to America. He thought of his students in Damascus, who might never receive music lessons again. He thought of all the dreams he had buried when he left his homeland. And then he thought of his father, who had taught him that music was the language all people spoke, regardless of where they came from. "I will sing," he whispered, and then stronger. "I will sing." The audience began to stir. Some clapped encouragingly, others groaned in annoyance. André smiled and gestured to his orchestra. "Gentlemen, ladies, we have a guest artist tonight." But what no one expected, not even André, was what would happen next. Because when Tariq opened his mouth to sing, no sound came out. The stress, the adrenaline, the overwhelming fear had taken his voice away. He stood there, mouth open, but completely silent. The audience began to laugh, not meanly, but uncomfortably. This was exactly what many had expected, an amateur who didn't know his own limits. "See?" someone whispered. "He can't do it." Tariq's face turned red with shame. He looked at André with eyes full of apology, ready to run off the stage and never be seen again. But André Rieu hadn't built his worldwide reputation by giving up on people when things got difficult. "It's okay, Tariq," he said softly. "Breathe. Take it easy. The music is still there." And then André did something that would change the entire character of the evening. André Rieu placed his violin under his chin and began to play softly. Not one of his famous waltzes or well-known classical pieces, but something simple and universal. It was a melody that every mother around the world would recognize, a lullaby that needed no words because it spoke directly to the heart. The orchestra immediately understood what he was doing and joined in softly, their instruments creating a soft, warm sound that was laid like a blanket over Symphony Hall. Tariq still stood motionless, his mouth half open, his eyes full of tears of shame. But then the music began to penetrate his soul, slowly taking away his panic and replacing it with something he had almost forgotten. "Peace. Listen, Tariq," André whispered, his violin still playing. "Do you hear that? That's the language we all speak." In the audience, the tension began to dissipate. The soft music had a calming effect, transforming the atmosphere from confrontation to something that looked more like an intimate gathering of friends. Juniper stood in the crowd, her phone still pointed at the stage, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had known Tariq had a beautiful voice. She had heard him sing on the street, but she hadn't known he would be so vulnerable in this moment. "Come on, Tariq," she whispered. "You can do this." Harlow Finch leaned over her balcony, fascinated by what she saw unfolding. This was no longer a concert. This was something much deeper, a moment of human connection she had never experienced in her 20 years of attending André Rieu concerts. On stage, André began to speak softly while he played, his words carrying over the microphone to every corner of the venue. "You know, Tariq, when I first stood on a stage, I was also afraid. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my violin." He continued playing, the melody making soft circles, like a bird circling before landing. "But my teacher said to me, 'André, the music isn't in your hands. The music is in your heart, and hearts can't tremble from fear, only from love.'" Tariq began to nod slowly, his breathing becoming deeper. André's words, combined with the hypnotizing music, began to penetrate his soul. "Think about why you're here," André continued softly. "Don't think about all these people. Think about the music you brought from home. Think about the songs your mother sang." At the word mother, Tariq began to cry softly. But they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of recognition, of remembering a love that knew no boundaries. "Sing for her, Tariq. Sing the song she would want to hear." The audience was now completely silent. Even those who had earlier shouted for him to leave were now listening with bated breath to this intimate moment between two musicians. Branson Creed stood at the edge of the stage, his hand no longer on his radio. Even he, trained to see and solve problems, understood this was no longer a problem. This had become something entirely different. Tariq closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice, softly singing as she rocked him to sleep. He heard his father's bass deep and full during evening prayers. He heard his own voice, young and enthusiastic, teaching his students in Damascus. And then, so softly it was barely audible, he began to sing, Ya Msafer Wayna, Ya Msafer Wayna. They were Arabic words most people in the audience didn't understand. But the emotion was universal. It was a song about travel, about longing for home, about love that overcomes distance. André smiled and adjusted his violin to match Tariq's pitch. The orchestra followed his lead, their Western instruments fluidly merging with the Eastern melody. Louder, Tariq, André encouraged. Let them hear your mother's song. Tariq's voice became stronger, fuller. He opened his eyes and looked not at the audience but at the stars above Boston, as if singing for those he had left behind. In the audience, people began to look at each other with wonder. This wasn't what they had expected when they bought tickets for an André Rieu concert. This was something much more authentic, something that touched their hearts in places they didn't know they had. Juniper was still filming, but now crying with joy. That's him, she whispered to no one in particular. That's the man I heard singing on the street. One elderly man next to her, who had earlier shouted for Tariq to leave, now stood quietly listening, his eyes moist. My God, he muttered. This man can really sing. On her balcony, Harlow Finch leaned forward, fascinated. This was the kind of moment she loved about live music. Not the polished perfection of orchestrated shows, but the raw, unfiltered emotion of a human soul revealing itself through art. Tariq's song grew in power and beauty, his voice filled with years of pain and longing, but also with unbroken hope. André's violin danced around his voice like a partner in an age-old dance. But then, at the climax of the song, something unexpected happened. Tariq suddenly stopped singing. He stood there, his mouth half open, staring at something in the audience with an expression of complete shock. André looked at him with concern. Tariq, what is it? But Tariq couldn't answer. He stared at a point in the crowd where 3 figures stood, a woman in a blue hijab and 2 small children. His wife, his children, who were supposed to still be in the refugee camp for months. Amira, he whispered, his voice picked up by the microphone. Habibi. The woman began to cry and tried to get to the stage but was held back by the crowd. The audience slowly realized what was happening. This wasn't a planned surprise. This was a real, spontaneous reunion. Let her through, someone shouted. Let his family through. André immediately understood the situation. Security, he said into the microphone. Help that woman and children get to the stage. Branson Creed, who had now completely switched from skeptical to compassionate, made a path through the audience to bring Tariq's family forward. The moment when Tariq embraced his wife Amira and their 2 children, Zaina, 8, and Rami, 6, on stage in front of thousands of strangers, was so pure, so real, that the entire venue fell into respectful silence. But this wasn't yet the end of the evening's surprises. Because what André Rieu did next would not only have America, but the entire world thinking about the power of music to bring people together. The moment Tariq embraced his wife Amira and their 2 children, Zaina and Rami, transformed the entire character of the evening. This was no longer a concert. This was a human drama unfolding before the eyes of thousands of witnesses. André Rieu stood to the side of this intimate reunion, his violin still in his hand, and felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of performing. This wasn't about entertainment or achievement. This was about the power of music to cause miracles. How are you here? Tariq whispered to his wife in Arabic, not realizing his microphone was still on. The papers came through today, Amira answered through her tears. We took the first bus to Boston. Someone said you would be here at a concert. The children clung to their father as if afraid he would disappear again. For them, this man who had left months ago to build a new life for them had become more a memory than a reality. The audience watched in breathless silence. Many were crying openly, moved by this unexpected turn of events. What had started as a disruption of their evening entertainment had changed into something that touched their hearts at a level they hadn't expected. Ladies and gentlemen, André said softly into the microphone, his voice full of emotion, what we're seeing here is why music exists. Not to entertain us, but to remind us of our shared humanity. He looked at Tariq, who was still holding his family as if they would disappear if he let go. Tariq, he said kindly, would you like to introduce your family to our friends here? Tariq looked up, his eyes red but shining with happiness. He took the microphone André offered him. This is my wife Amira, he said, his English broken but understandable, and my children Zaina and Rami. He looked out over the audience, these thousands of strangers who had witnessed the most personal moment of his life. I want to say sorry for coming on stage without permission, but music. He stopped, searching for the right words in a language that wasn't quite his yet. Music made me forget where I was, made me forget I was alone. In the audience, applause slowly began to rise. Not the enthusiastic cheering of a typical concert, but something deeper, the sound of people acknowledging they had witnessed something special. Juniper stood in the crowd, her phone still pointed at the stage, realizing she had captured something that would reach far beyond this moment, this venue, this evening. This was a story that needed to be told. Harlow leaned over her balcony and called down, "Welcome to America, welcome home." Other voices joined in. "Welcome, we're glad you're here, keep singing." But there were also other sounds. "This isn't a place for politics." Someone from the back of the crowd shouted, "We came for André, not for this." André heard the mixed reactions and made a decision that would define his career. He took his microphone back. "Friends," he said, his voice carrying across the entire venue, "I know some of you came here for waltzes and polkas, and we'll play those, but first I want to tell you something about music." He began to walk slowly across the stage, his movements those of a teacher giving a lesson. Music knows no nationality. A C-sharp sounds the same whether you play it in America, Syria, or anywhere else in the world. A mother's lullaby brings the same comfort, regardless of the language in which it's sung. He stopped and looked at Tariq's family. This man is not a stranger. He's a fellow musician who found his family through the power of art. He knelt beside Zaina and Rami, who were shyly hiding behind their mother. "These children are the future of our world," André addressed the audience again. "So tonight, here on this historic stage in the heart of Boston, we're going to do something that perhaps has never been done before. We're going to give a concert where two cultures, two languages, two traditions come together in the universal language of music." He gestured to the orchestra. "Ladies, gentlemen of my orchestra, can you improvise on an Arabic melody?" The orchestra members looked at each other with smiles. Challenge accepted. "And Tariq," André continued, "could you teach us how we can build a bridge between your music and ours?" Tariq looked confused. I don't understand." "Sing another song, something your children know, something you would sing with them at home, and we'll try to play along?" Little Zaina tugged at her father's shirt and whispered something in his ear in Arabic. Tariq smiled for the first time that evening, a real warm smile full of love. "My daughter, she wants me to sing Tutti Tutti, a children's song," but he looked uncertainly at the audience. "Maybe not interesting for everyone." "Trust me," André said. Tariq looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. He picked up his daughter in his arms and began to sing softly. "Tutti Tutti Tutti ya Umelulu." It was a simple children's song about a little mouse, but Tariq sang it with so much warmth and joy that the entire audience fell silent. André listened carefully to the melody and began to play soft supporting notes on his violin. Slowly, other orchestra members joined in. The flutist found a harmony that perfectly matched Tariq's voice. The cellist added a deep, warm bass. Within a few minutes, the entire orchestra had created a full arrangement around this simple Arabic children's song, and then something magical happened. Little Rami began to sing along with his father. His high, clear voice joined Tariq's singing, and suddenly father and son were singing together on the stage of Symphony Hall. The audience was now completely silent, fascinated by this spontaneous musical creation. Many were filming with their phones. Others simply listened, letting the music wash over them. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence, and then the entire venue burst into applause, not polite or forced, but spontaneous and full of genuine emotion. André smiled broadly. "And that, friends, is why I make music for moments like these." He looked at Tariq. "Will you teach us another song?" The next 2 hours became what would later be described as the most unusual and moving concert in the history of Symphony Hall. André and his orchestra played their usual repertoire, but in between they invited Tariq and his family to sing Arabic songs, supported by Western instruments. Zaina taught the audience how to clap to an Arabic rhythm. Rami sang a duet with André of a song that was half English, half Arabic. Amira, initially shy, eventually sang a beautiful ballad about love that overcomes distance. But the moment that would define the evening came at the end. André took the microphone for his closing words, as he always did. But instead of his usual thanks, he said something that would make America think. Friends, tonight we experienced something we'll never forget. We saw how music can break down borders, how art can bring together people who at first glance seem to have nothing in common. He looked at Tariq's family, who were still standing on stage. This family didn't come here to change us or take over our culture. They came here looking for safety, for a chance to give their children a better future. And tonight, they gave us something we didn't expect. They showed us that our culture doesn't become weaker through diversity, but stronger. The audience listened in breathless silence. Tariq could teach us children's songs. We could teach him our waltzes. And together, we created something none of us could have made alone. He paused, choosing his words carefully. This is America at its best, a country that welcomes new talent. Not out of pity, but because we understand that talent has no passport. A country strong enough to open its arms to those who share our values, love for family, respect for art, and belief in the power of hard work to build a better life. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear a pin drop. And then one person stood up and began to clap, then another and another. Within moments, the entire venue was on its feet, in a standing ovation that wasn't just for the music, but for the moment of human connection they had all shared. Tariq stood there with his family, overwhelmed by the warmth of the reception. This wasn't the America he had expected when he arrived as a refugee 3 years ago. This was something much more beautiful. "Thank you," he said into the microphone, his voice broken with emotion. "Thank you all. For first time since long time, I feel welcome. I feel home." André put his arm around Tariq's shoulder. "Welcome home, friend. Welcome home." The YouTube video of that evening was viewed more than 50 million times worldwide within a week. Welcome Home became trending on social media, with thousands of stories from people sharing their own experiences of welcoming newcomers into their communities. Tariq got a job as a music teacher at an international school in Boston. His children went to the local school and learned English fluently, though they still spoke Arabic at home with their parents. André Rieu'S founded the Music Without Borders Foundation, dedicated to helping refugee musicians share their talent in their new homelands. The foundation organized concerts throughout America, where local artists collaborated with newcomers. Juniper's video of that evening won a journalism prize and led to a documentary about music as an instrument for integration. Harlow Finch became a volunteer at the local refugee center, inspired by what she had seen that night. And Branson Creed. He took guitar lessons from an Afghan refugee he met during one of André's follow-up concerts. But perhaps the most beautiful thing was the fact that every year, on the anniversary of that special concert, families from all over America come to Boston to participate in the Festival of Voices, an annual event where musicians from all backgrounds come together to show that, as André said that night, talent has no passport, and music is the only language everyone speaks. And at the center of that festival every year, a Syrian family sings American children's songs, while an American audience learns Arabic melodies. Because sometimes, as André Rieu'S proved that night, the most beautiful music we can make doesn't come from perfect planning but from perfect courage. The courage to welcome a stranger, to accept an outstretched hand, and to believe that we're all more alike than different. And as Tariq always says, when people ask him about that magical night, sometimes you just need a stage to turn rejection into recognition.